Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now this is the AMD Radeon R5 340X. You may not have heard of this OLED based graphics card, but it's a very cheap option that supports DX11, requires no additional PSU power thanks to its small form factor, and will fit inside almost any PC. Full height brackets are also available. I paid just £20 for this card, which wasn't a one-off lucky find. These just don't cost that much. So while the card can run modern games, can it actually play them? Well, let's find out. So as you might expect, this isn't a 1080p gaming graphics card, at least not in a lot of situations, but it should be able to run those esports titles like CSGO with relative ease at lower resolutions. The first gameplay footage here is of course from CSGO. Now the average frame rate came in at around 69 FPS, and while there were some drops, overall the gameplay was fairly smooth, and I'd call this playable on this card, although turning up the resolution isn't going to be a very good idea, let's put it that way. The footage here is from a bot match, but the figures on screen are taken from an online game, as it's just easier that way. Performance, to be honest, really isn't that different at all, as CSGO is more CPU intensive. As you can see here, I was actually not doing very well, even when playing against some bots, so yeah, that just about sums it up for my CSGO gameplay capabilities. So while this card isn't suited to those AAA games, there are a few that will run with 30 FPS or more at lower resolutions. Fallout 4 is one of them. We were averaging just over 30 here, though we did have to make use of the low in-game settings. Now low mainly seems to affect things like foliage trees. There aren't as many trees, the textures look a little bit muddier, but to be honest, it looks okay. This game isn't one of the best looking out there anyway, but this is what's needed in order to be able to run the game on the R5 340X GPU. As you can see, our CPU really isn't being utilised that much, and throughout you might notice that the card is running with about 60 to 70% usage. It doesn't get up to 100, but I think that should probably say 99 to 100%. This may have been a glitch or something with MSI Afterburner, because believe me, the card is being maxed out under pretty much every situation today. Fortnite is a good example of a game that will run just like CSGO. Here we were running at 1080p with a slight reduction in resolution scale, and we did have the performance mode enabled. The performance mode is the new mode that pretty much turns the graphics down beyond the low settings, but it does mean that older cards and weaker cards like this one can run the game with at least 60 frames per second, whereas they might not be able to otherwise. If we were just using the low settings here, then we'd be getting around 30 to 40 FPS, which in Fortnite isn't ideal if everyone else is running with a much higher frame rate. The more frames you can get, the more competitive you can be in games like this one. Again, the CPU isn't really doing too much. The card is pretty much maxing out, but interestingly, the VRAM of the card isn't really maxing out either, to be honest. This has 2 gigs of DDR3 and only around a gigabyte was being used. GTA 5 seems to run on just about anything, providing you are willing to turn the settings down low enough on those older cards. Here at 1080p with a 50% reduction in resolution scale, we were seeing a pretty decent frame rate. It really isn't bad from a card that cost me £20, to be honest, as GTA is still a very relevant game, and one it seems that can run on this card with no major problems. For the money, I think that's pretty good. This card is available usually on eBay. It's usually one of those GPUs that's been ripped out of Dell workstation systems, things like that. Interestingly, it supports all of the latest AMD drivers though, so you can just put it in your system, whether that's a small form factor system or a standard desktop tower, install the latest AMD drivers from the site, and away you go. I was just downtown here causing some carnage. Obviously the frame rate will be slightly higher outside of the city area here, and you can expect it to hit over 60 FPS in some situations. Another esports title now, and Overwatch ran with at least 60 FPS. This totally depends on the map, but if you are willing to turn the resolution scaling down to say 50% like I have done here, then you shouldn't have any problems with seeing 60 plus FPS on the majority of the in-game maps. Now this footage was actually taken from an online game we're in the, is it the junkyard? I can't remember what this map's called exactly, but yeah, as you can see, the frame rate is going beyond 60 FPS, 70 sometimes in fact, and the game still doesn't really look all that bad despite us turning the resolution scaling option down. If anything, it probably looks worse than it is due to the compression with the YouTube uploads, but yeah, it didn't look too bad and it ran pretty well as well. So in Rainbow Six Siege, it was pretty, well, the performance was okay. We had to turn things down to 900p and then make use of 25% resolution scaling, and despite this, it really doesn't look as bad as it sounds. You might think, well, 25% resolution scaling is going to destroy the visuals, but it actually looks okay. The frame rate isn't ideal though, to be honest. Perhaps the newest game tested today is Resident Evil Village. This is still the demo version, which is available until today, I believe, the 10th of May. There are some options here that can be turned all the way down that will really help out the frame rate. One of them is the resolution scaling, and because that option exists, well, we had no choice but to use it, to be fair. 720p with 50% scaling here still didn't mean a 30 FPS average, and I pretty much knew this was going to happen going into it. I just wanted to see how this card handled a new game like Resident Evil 8. Not very well is the conclusion, I think. And the same can be said for The Witcher 3. This is of course an older game, but it is still quite a demanding one. We weren't even seeing 20 FPS here with the lowest settings and the lowest in-game resolution. Actually, 1024 by 768 is the lowest available, I believe, but even then, you don't really get much of an improvement over 1280 by 720, maybe 1 or 2 FPS, but still, it's not going to be playable. Overall then, the R5 340X is a card that perhaps you haven't heard of, and it's one that, well, probably isn't going to concern you too much if you haven't heard of it before. If you're looking for something very cheap that can play Overwatch, GTA and CSGO, and you don't have much to spend, then it may be a card that could be worth considering, especially at the moment when anything higher end is hard to find. And for any of you out there who might have a Core 2 Duo pre-built Dell, something like that, maybe something with a Core 2 Quad of a smaller form factor, you could buy one of these and it could be an ideal and cheap way to get that machine gaming rather than selling it because it can't play what you want. You can find them now on sites like eBay, perhaps even Amazon. They don't cost that much, and if you are looking for a very light gaming experience and you're not too concerned with the resolution or settings, perhaps this might just be for you. You never know. Thank you for watching then. If you enjoyed it, leave a like on it, leave a dislike if you didn't, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.